So good morning, everybody. Good morning. And so first of all, I always want to start my presentations with, especially when I have an audience. Thank goodness, I know it's being filmed, but I have eyeballs to look at today. I want to keep this casual. And so if you feel free at any time to make a comment, to make a fact, correct me if I'm wrong.
Never.
And a joke, I don't care. But I want us to learn, but I also like to have fun. So I never was a school teacher, so I am not rigid whatsoever. So anyway, so let's learn about composting and have a few laughs while we're doing it. So anyway, first of all, I always bring, so tell me, how much money have y'all spent on books? I mean, you're gonna get to a point where, okay, I'm having to be picky about what I buy.
Yeah.
But I always like, because a whole new world has been opened up to you here. The first thing you learn is everything that you've been doing wrong for 20 years. So anyway, so I bought a few of my books that are my special ones. And this is Sally Wachowski and her husband, and you may have seen it. This is an older book. I'll keep them set out so when we take a break, since it's kind of dark. This is Texas Natives, and it's a very excellent resource for native plants. And if y'all are anything like I was, I fought native plants forever until I became a master gardener and realized, okay, Texas, I'm gonna have to embrace these things. And I'm glad I did, because everything they say about Texas natives is true. They're very drought tolerant. They are some pretty blooms in native plants. I was always so hooked on Country Home Gardener. And I would go out and spend all this money on everything that was in Country Home Gardener, and then by August it was all gone. And so first thing you need to do is throw away your Country Home Gardener, and just don't even waste your money on that magazine, because it's for Connecticut and up in there. But this is a very good resource that that shows you them in bloom and to kind of get you started. But like it's a well-known book, and it's fairly old, so you probably get it on Amazon for $2 or $3 these days. I'm also, herbs are my passion. I've always, even since I've been a teenager, I have loved herbs. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Madeline Hill. She is the Texas herb lady, or the guru. This is her book, Southern Herb Growing. It's an older book also. It is excellent, because she's going to tell you the truth on you can't grow this in Texas, or you can only, this is where I learned that cilantro can only be grown in the fall here. Chamomile can only be grown in the fall here. So that's where I learned this, was in this book here, not to mention the recipes that she has in here. Some of them are kind of fancy, but anyway, it's an excellent herb book to start, if you're interested in herbs to start out. And the holy grail of all master gardeners is Doug Welch's Texas Garden Almanac. It is, and you can now get this on Amazon. I don't pay, when I can, I don't pay full price for books. I just wait till they kind of go down, unless it's an author like comes here, you know, about for a seminar or something, I will pay full price, because a lot of times their books go for scholarships and stuff. But anyway, I paid full price for this book.
I have seen that one. I have seen that one for like $7 or $8 at half price
it's
books.
Old enough now.
And Susan, I will tell you this also. I have seen Cozy run and chase down Doug Welch just to give him a hug.
I jumped out that a bit.
So this is excellent. It is, not to mention he is hilarious. He's retired now, and I hate that y'all aren't going to really get to know him as well as an acquaintance as I did when I first started. But this goes month by month. It is for gardeners, and if you're not a gardener, it's as well for your flower beds and everything. But it goes month by month. You got a checklist, and all of that. I keep this out. I read the month every year. I read at the beginning of the month. I reread whatever the month is. But this is a must-have.
It's
a
$30
must.
on Amazon.
Is it?
I paid $7.50 at Half Price Books.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's even if you do pay the 30,
It's
I
worth
made
it.
it's excellent. I made a special trip
I didn't
to
know.
Bryan to get it when it first came out, and it came in a cellophane wrapped up, and so I of course took the cellophane. I'm trying to drive down Highway 21. I could not even wait till I got home for this. But anyway, these are just a few books if you're looking for some extra, to get some extra or knowledge or reference. Those are 3 excellent. We will do vermiculture in the second part of this. And this is, if you're interested in raising worms, which
No
like I
way.
said, we'll get to that. This is an excellent, excellent
What's
book.
it called?
It's Worms Eat My Garbage.
Okay.
And it's an excellent book to get started on that. So, anyway.
Doug Welch, is he the one that, I mean, I get a blog. Is that the blog that I'm getting the newsletter from him?
I don't know, it might
Online?
be Bill Welch, which
I
I
mean,
used to get Bill and Doug mixed up when I was
Okay.
a first master gardener. They're easy to confuse.
This is a garden thing that comes out I just got it, Texas Gardener. I thought it was Texas Gardener Almanac. It's on the internet.
I don't know, I'm not familiar with that. Are
I'm not
you,
either.
Richard?
No, I'm not
not
familiar
familiar with.
Maybe I'm wrong. I mean,
I don't get it when we take a break on, because
Okay.
that might be something I made. No, it's not Texas Seed Garden Seeds, is
No.
it? Okay.
no, this is
Okay.
like, it tells you what to do every month.
can't
It
find
tells you what, in fact, I just got one, go ahead.
Okay, so anyway, get that out and we'll revisit it at break. And a magazines, your magazines. Texas Gardener Magazine is just is the best one out there. I fought that one too because it wasn't foo-foo enough for me, but at first, but you need to, we're in Texas. The foof needs to be gone. We just can't be foofy here. So we need hard, rugged plants here. And so Texas Gardener Magazine is one of your best. I can't think of another. Do you take any other
Texas
one,
Gardener
Richard?
is the only one I
Yeah, that may just, the only one I have found that you can trust what it says.
I mean, like things like Southern Living and all have some that are somewhat,
Yeah,
but they
somewhat,
cover
but-
the whole South from here to Virginia, and there's some stuff that they can grow in Virginia we just can't grow here.
Right. Southern Living's got too many advertisements for me. I quit Southern Living, but Texas Gardener is an excellent.
They got that floof in
excellent.
Southern Living.
Yes.
Y'all get a link on that, so we could get a discount? No, I can't find the link.
Yeah, you can't, because Richard
Well,
and I tried.
I'll have to go back because I did get something from Jayla recently, I think, so I'll have to go back and see if I can find
I
it.
did it, and I don't know. I was able to do it, but I did it right away. So I don't know if the time has expired, or even if there was a time limit on it. But I was able to do it, but now I don't remember.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of rigmarole though to get to it. So, all right. So, do any of y'all compost now? Nobody compost. Oh, good.
Try.
And how long have you been doing it?
Ever since we started this year, I'm gonna say this year.
Okay, then
We
you just haven't had enough time yet
And
for it
by
to really.
composting, I mean, and I'm saving all my scraps, and then last night we drove down to the little area, and it looks like it's not right. I told my husband, we need to contain this.
You don't
Okay.
necessarily
Yeah.
have to, but
Okay.
yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So, anyway, so you're somewhat a little bit familiar with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the kind of theme of our program today is going to be balance, balance, balance. Everything works in a balance. If it's all balanced, it all goes correctly. It's all in sync, and well, I guess I gotta get my clicker. So that's kind of what I needed, kind of a title, and that's just what I came up with. So. Okay, environment. So we're just going to hit on this just real lightly, real quick, because you do need to, if you're going to be talking about composting. Just like I said, I'm not going to get real deep into it, but what do you think of when you see the above word? You know, or not really, just kind of a phrase, or when you think of environment, what do you kind of think of?
Surroundings.
Your surroundings, right? But you kind of think of it as big, like, oh my God. Well, it in fact, your yard is the environment which you have the most control over. So you need to start at home is basically what that saying is. You need to just start at home. So a good way to start that is to use yard-wise a theory called Yardwise. And what that is it's a 4-step program to help. Can y'all see this? Am I in y'all's way? Okay. It's a 4-step program that to help maintain a healthy yard. And, you know, back in the, we hit the industrial age in the 1950s, and that's when commercial fertilizer started coming out, and margarine, and all this stuff that, you know, that is shortcuts. And, you know, back before then, before World War II and stuff, well, you know, farmers used yard-wise principles, and that's all they had. And then after World War II and the big boom and all of that, was people started getting lazy, and I call it the Dow chemical days. But anyway, the 4-step program is grass cycling, mulching, composting, and green yard care. And grass cycling is nothing more than when you cut your grass, leave it on your lawn. It actually breaks down and fertilizes your yard with nitrogen. Now, I realize some of you, I always like to bring this up, because if we live in the country, or some of us do, and if you live on a hay meadow like I do, that's not always possible. Sometimes you got to rake it up. There's just, if your yard is bahia and you've had some rain and it's grown 4 inches in 24 hours, it's going to be hard to. So I'm not saying don't ever rake it, but if you have a St. Augustine yard and lawn and all that, there's just cut it, leave it on the ground, and it'll fertilize. It'll help fertilize the ground. Also, with that is on your grass. I'm trying to keep up with what classes y'all's had, but have y'all had where you only need 1 inch a week? 1 inch a week is all your flower beds and your yard needs. Now you kind of have to train it, you know, because 1 inch of water, but deeply, water deeply. So, like, not go out there with your hand water and stand there and water. This is either your water sprinkler that goes back and forth on low, because, you know, the higher it gets, it's going to just evaporate, or a soaker hose, of course, being the ultimate. 1 inch of water a week, if it's watered properly, will go almost 6 inches into the soil if it's done slow and steady. So your yard and flower beds only need 1 inch of water per week. That's if you're composting and mulching, you know, too. Anyway, they also recommend on fertilizing your slow release. There's nothing, my husband uses triple 13. We do, well, that's one of my compromises I've had to compromise. You know, it's all about, your marriage is all about compromise. That is one of my, I prefer to be natural, but I have compromised on the triple 13. So anyway, but it's, you put out the triple 13, and what does it do? Y'all, I think y'all had the grass class. It shoots that, and you know, if you're growing hay, that's fine, but it just quickly grows and then it's done. A slow release, slowly, steady release fertilizer, slowly, steady, it grows slow and steady, and you don't have that big spurt. There's, that's another, what I call a Dow chemical syndrome, where you think you have to, the slow release you're too impatient with. Mulching. Anybody here mulch? Are you mulching now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, mulching. Of course, when you put mulch onto your flower bed, or if you somewhat like mulch your garden like with hay, which I'll get back to that, but on your flower beds, you need to mulch 3 to 4 inches. That helps suppress the weeds. Now, it's not going to, you're a gardener, so you're going to have to weed. That's just the way it is. But the weeds won't be as prolific. They'll also just pull out just real easy because they're not getting the sun and all of that they would if the mulch wasn't there. Mulching also helps in keeping the moisture in. So once you've done your 1 inch of water, you want to keep it as long as you can in covering up the soil. Mulch retains your water.
What are you mulching with?
Well, I have been the freebie girl. I have, which we will get to leaves. Leaves has been my most go-to. Anything that the trucks that are trimming trees, sometimes if they're close enough and they're putting them through that chute, and when the truck gets full, they'll just dump them at your house. I've used that for years. You have to be pretty close. They're not going to drive too far to do it. I have used that. But I've always been about the free, but y'all, this year I have a confession. I bought my mulch this year, and I was so happy with it.
So where did you send? Where did you buy it from?
Bobo's.
Bobo's, okay.
Bobo's is pretty, I buy my potting soil from Bobo's, my mulch from Bobo's. I buy almost anything that I can, and I buy a little bit up here from Centerville, but mostly I buy, and Bobo's potting soil, if you get their BMI1, is excellent potting soil, which just ask them what do they, that may be all they carry, but anyway,
And can I ask one more question? Sorry about that.
No.
What kind of mulch? I know they have lots of kinds of Bobo's.
I buy, what did I buy? The cedar, I think.
Okay, cedar.
Cedar is what I went with. I think it was a little bit more expensive, but I was just, I don't know. I may be buying
Creating a
mulch.
monster.
I may have to, creating a monster.
She's gone to the dark side.
I have, and I thought, I'm gonna have to stand up here and admit it.
And now it's on film.
Right. Maybe they have classes for that. And then composting. They say do it twice a year, but I'm telling you, if you got any flower beds or if you garden or whatever, twice a year is gonna be hard to mulch. But if you can just get some mulch, scratch it in a little bit, don't take it too deep. You don't want it to go very deep because you want your microbes to come up from the bottom to the top. So know when you're dumping it and spreading it out, kind of mix it in, but don't go any deeper than your hose width or length, I guess it would be. When you're scratching it in, don't sit there and just keep digging, just scratch, just walk along and scratch it in. But you don't want to go too deep with it when you're composting. And then green yard care, which is kind of basically the 7 principles of xeriscaping. Are y'all familiar with xeriscaping? Isn't that it? Xeriscaping, yeah.
Starts with an X though, not a Z.
Yeah. That basically it's grass cycling, leaving your grass on the ground, mulching, composting, only watering 1 inch a week, using native plants only. Now, I'm not saying don't ever use some foo-foo because I still like my hibiscus. But if you just put them, gather them up in one spot, to where, and just you have these little drifts of your foo-foo plants, and then then you just you water more in just that little area, and you're not watering your whole flower bed over and over just to get. I like to bury in pots, I bury my foo-foo plants too a lot of times. I'll just dig a hole and bury them in the ground. That helps keeps them moist. And then a lot of those, you've got to do something with them in the wintertime. I can just pull the pot up and go. So that's basically what green yard care is. Many common yard care practices are out of balance with nature. We don't think about using nature to our advantage anymore. There again, the Dow chemical syndrome. Just go out and buy it and put it on there. A lot of your yard care, it just takes time. You've got to, anytime you do anything the natural way, you have to be ahead of it and not wait till it happens, because then it's too late. And I'm just bugs, just real quick for an example. You have to do a lot of care things before the infestation even starts. And so it does take a little bit more time. Why yard wise? Why even bother? Every year, 5 million tons of yard trimmings and organic materials end up in the landfills. When I went to get now I'm not certified composter through Texas Master Gardeners because I didn't have it at the time. I am certified through TWC or in Bryan through their hazardous waste and all of that. They had a program, and that's how I got my certification. So when I was going to classes, we had to visit a landfill as part of the program, and it's incredible when you go to a landfill. Incredible. We're dirty people. Well, for two things that it was the amount of trash that we produce, and the second thing is how neat and tidy it was. And under federal regulations, they have to keep it. I mean, they have to keep it picked up and everything. So the perimeter was immaculate around the big hole that they put the garbage in. So anyway, so the yard trimmings, you can be used. That compost. So that can be used in your environment. Now it's going to compost at the landfill sooner or later, but why even haul it to the landfill? That leaves more room for garbage that actually needs to be in the landfill. So the solution is use yard waste to build up your soil. That can be done right there on your property. Millions of gallons of city-treated water are used to irrigate landscapes. Actually, the residential person uses more water than what the farmer does. And how many times have you drove through a subdivision somewhere, somebody isn't keeping an eye on their watering system and they're watering the sidewalk? And that's what it's talking about, of course, and doing the 1 inch of water. But people just aren't paying attention to their irrigation systems and stuff, and all this water is being wasted. The solution, use native plants that are naturally mulched and sustained by rainfall. So, and another thing on your native plants, you may lose that native plant in July, end of July, 1st of August, but your first September rain, they're just dormant. And one of the things that Doug Welch always says, our flower beds, face it, in July and August, it's hard to get any kind of color out of them. If you got zinnias, you're doing good. Periwinkles, they do good. But so many of our other stuff, our roses quit blooming for a little while. Sometimes my hibiscus quit blooming for a little while. And so a lot of things just kind of go dormant during that. So Doug Welch always has a saying that says, remember, brown is a color too. Okay, another problem we have is synthetic fertilizers and pesticides are applied to compensate for the loss of nutrients. So there you go again. You go get your triple 13, you throw it on there, it grows 90 miles an hour, and then it's done. It's done. And you got to keep doing that. Well, over-fertilization is why we're having so many problems in our tanks with some of the aquatic plants that shouldn't be there, and of course also just the runoff that runs into our streams and in our is from applying too much. Nothing wrong with using synthetic fertilizer. I'm not knocking it, but do what it says on the package. Don't be like my husband, who, if one cup will do, 4 will be even better. That's where you get your runoff from. And so, so if you are going to use, like I said, I'm not saying don't, because I do at my house, but just be careful. Make sure you follow the instructions on there. So use compost, mulch, and other natural remedies to help alleviate that problem. Again, remember, your natural remedies, you have to start it before the problem happens, and or when you first see that little bug or whatever. Otherwise, you're going to have to get the big boys out. And sometimes you do. And sometimes you don't have a choice but to get out the pesticides and stuff, so that you don't lose your crop. But if you just kind of go out there every day and just keep an eye on it and look for, move your leaves around and stuff, and look under them and over them and in between them, your natural remedies will work for you if you don't wait too late. Otherwise, they're not going to work. As our population increases and home landscapes become a larger part of the Texas environment, it's more important than ever to manage them responsibly. So it's up to each individual, you know, to try to manage this responsibly. It is all of our problems, not just the person that lives down the street, or it's everybody's problem. Until everybody pitches in, it's not going to get any better. Everybody's got to do their part. But anyway, mulch versus compost. So I'm assuming y'all all know the difference between mulch and compost. Some people don't if they've never gardened before, but anyway, mulch is the material spread on top of the ground to benefit the soil and plant health and inhibit weed growth. Remember, I know it doesn't completely get rid of the weeds. I don't mind weeding, so I like in the morning to walk around with a cup of coffee, view my flower beds, and pull a weed here and pull a weed there. I don't mind that. That's my kind of weeding. I actually kind of find it soothing. So mulch that's the kind of weeding you'll do with mulch. There won't be a complete takeover like if your ground was bare. Compost is the humus-rich material resulting from the decomposition of organic matter. So you're making compost, you're throwing it in a pile, it's decomposing, which is making this rich, just wonderful soil, and then you add it to your flower bed, garden, whatever, and then it just boosts everything in there. Composting is just a natural biological process that reduces organic waste. All right, the benefits of mulch. I've already hit on some of it already. I get ahead of myself sometimes, but it prevents soil compaction and erosion, and it really does. I mean, my flower beds, now I've had my flower beds for years and years, but my soil's incredible. I was just pre-weeding the other day, deheading that first little cool snap that we had, and I just, and moving some of my mulch away to get ready to plant poppies, And oh my goodness gracious, my soul is just, it is just so pretty. It's just so dark. And it was it had just rained, so it was the perfect consistent moisture consistency, so it wasn't all dry and everything. Do y'all have sand? Do most of y'all have sand?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good thing though, but it's just going to take you a while to condition. I started out with pure, I live on a sand hill, so I have pure sand until so many feet down, and then it's nothing but clay. And so through the years, it's taken a few years, but I'd take the sand over clay any day.
Any day.
Any day. So mulching and composting together will help condition your sandy soil to where it needs to be. It suppresses weeds. It captures and retains moisture. It protects the plant roots and crowns from extreme temperatures. So in the you have that soil covered up with 3 to 4 inches of mulch, and the heat's just not going to get down to the root system. Also, if you've ever noticed, if you mulch, if you pile, which I normally pile plants that I want to protect with leaves, just put a big layer of leaves, cut them back, put a big layer of leaves. That also, the plants that are just kind of iffy here, a lot of times you can get them to come back if you mulch real good. Once I'll let the first frost take them down, and then I know they're not completely dead. Then I cut them back, put a layer of leaves, mulch them up around it, put a layer of leaves on top of that, and just kind of keep an eye on it in the spring and then you get, like I said, you can carry over some borderline plants that way sometimes. It adds nutrients to the soil as it breaks down. So mulch is a natural product, right? So guess what it does? And that's why you have to spend so much money every year and replace it. It breaks down, but while it's breaking down, it's fertilizing your flower bed. And so as it breaks down, your microbes are in there, woo-woo, and they're kind of coming up to the top and breaking that stuff down, and then it's used as, the plant uses it as fertilizer. So mulching is a twofer, really. Okay, just said that. And it stimulates microbe activity. And microbes is what makes the world go round in so many areas. And in gardening, your microbes are very, very important. And how to get them stimulated and how to get them going is by composting and mulching. And they just really love it, which we'll talk a little bit more on microbe activity. The benefits of compost: it enriches the soil with nutrients. It's a buffer to overcome pH problems. So when you're composting and using compost, it's just a wonderful world down there because it knows what it needs and what it doesn't need, and it keeps it all in balance. So you're adding your compost every year, trying to be as organic as you possibly can, and adding mulch on top of that, and underneath your soil is just absolutely balanced under there. When not at first, when you're first, but I'm saying once you've got it conditioned, you've got a wonderful soil under there. It loosens tight, heavy soil. So, and it helps sandy soil retain moisture and nutrients. It also improves aeration. So it's not so compact in there, it's loose, air can get down there, your microbes can breathe and multiply. And it can be used as a mulch around your landscape plants. I wouldn't use it as a mulch myself. I would mulch on top of it. You would get more weed growth. I don't know that your moisture, you wouldn't lose some of your moisture, but if you had to choose between the two, you can use it as a mulch. The benefits of composting, back to that, and you get healthier, bigger, stronger plants. And also, remember, you can use this as your complete fertilizer. You don't have to, and that's what I do. I don't use, the only thing I fertilize is my blooming plants, is all I fertilize. I don't ever fertilize my evergreens in the flower bed, ever. I just don't do it. I do give my blooming flowers a boost now and then. It saves money by reducing cost on lawn and garden products. It also helps the reduction of trash, the removal of trash. It's practical and convenient. You don't have to add it to a bag. You just put it on the yard. You just go outside and put it on the yard. It's an alternate to the landfill. And like I said earlier, yard waste is 20% of the trash thrown away each year. So that would allow 20% more room in the landfill for what kind of really needs to be there. Compost, like air and water, it is the essential part of life. So we're kind of back to the balance thing. Anything's going to, and that's, I'm just, start simple. Keep it simple. I guess I've kind of passed that up, but you know, it's going to compost. When we get to it, I cold compost. I don't hot compost. I don't want to have to worry with it and worry about the temperature and all of that. I just want to go out there, throw it on there. Well, it's going to compost. I mean, a dead raccoon laying in your yard is going to compost. You know, I mean, that's the circle of life. It's going to compost. So you're going to get, if you start it, like you said, you just started yours, you're, just by what you said, you're cold composting. So it's just going to take it a year to really get you something out of the bottom of it, you know, on the bottom. But it's going to compost. So start out simple with this. Don't think you have to be real elaborate or anything. Just start out simple. See if it's for you, or oh, it's nice to go out there and just get a wheelbarrow load of compost just to spread around. I mean, it's just incredible how all this stuff, all leaves and kitchen waste on top, and down on bottom you have this dark, rich, it smells wonderful.
Where is your compost?
In the backyard. We'll get to that.
Okay.
It's in my backyard.
How far away from the house?
Not too far. I advise, that depends on how you feel about critters, which we're going to get to all that.
Okay.
But don't get it so far you're not going to use it. Mine's borderline. I will go out there and put my stuff in it, but if it was any further, I probably wouldn't. But you do need to keep in mind where it can be put in the sun or the shade. Now, common sense will tell you, if it's put in the shade, it's going to take longer for it all to break down. If it's put in the sun, of course, it's going to heat. The sun will help heat it up, and you'll get compost quicker. Mine's in the full sun. Soil, this is my favorite slide. Soil is a living organism that requires regular feeding to remain healthy. You know, a lot of people, you don't think about your soil as a living organism, but it is. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in there. All your microbe activity, your worms, your and all of that are down there just working so that you can have a garden or a nice flower bed. Feed the soil, not the plant. How many times have you heard that? And that's another thing about composting and mulching. You can go buy, which is better in the long run anyway, go buy the smaller plant rather than the big one, and it will be acclimated. By the time it gets to the size of the big one, it's going to be acclimated to your ground. It's going to know what it can and can't do in your soil, and it's going to grow a lot faster and a lot healthier than buying the big one. Now, I'm not saying don't ever buy the big one, but don't feel guilty that you don't have enough money and you got to buy the little one. I always buy the little one and let it work its way and be used to my soil and everything than buy the big one and put it in there and big plant of whatever. All right, the 5 basic needs of a compost pile. So the compost pile, which I'll say the same thing about vermiculture when we get there on the second part, is like you and I. It needs the same things we do. It needs air, it needs moisture, it needs warmth, it needs carbon for energy, and nitrogen for protein, which we'll dig deeper into that in just a minute. So those are the 5 basic needs of a compost pile. Air. Air is required to help the decomposition of the organic matter. It's got to have air to help decompose. Turning your compost pile is the best way to add air to it. I don't turn mine. I never turn it. And it still composts. So there's another, now if you want it to compost faster, turn it, you know, when you go out there. But I get compost, I have enough compost always, every spring, when I'm getting my flower beds ready to do what I need to do with, and I'm happy with that. I don't care if and then I'll have enough to ailing plant if I want to put some extra around it. But in the way I compost, I have enough compost when I use it, the one and only time that I do use it, and I have enough, so I'm happy. So if you want to use it more often, do it twice a year or whatever, you might need to step up your game as far as getting it warming it up a little bit. But air is the best way to get. Another thing you can do is you can take some sewer pipes or PVC pipe, you can stick those in your compost pile, and that's a good way to water it also. Another thing that people do to get air in their compost pile, which takes a little bit longer to break down, but if you're a sunflower grower and got to have sunflowers, you can't make it through the summer without them, you can take the stalks and do a grid once the sunflowers are through, compost on top of that, and then you've got air added that way also. Now it's going to take, you know how sunflower stalks are, it'll take a little while for them to decompose, but they will decompose. Anything, when I go to use, my compost pile is not the ultimate. You know, they say the cobbler's kids never have any shoes. Mine's pitiful. I don't even have the right to stand up here and talk. Mine's so bad. But it still makes compost. It's not ideal. It was an experiment done years ago because we didn't know Don and I didn't know anything about composting. And that's just how it's been. And it's on the back. My ultimate one is on the back burner. Someday maybe it'll get done. But mine is not efficient. So, it's hard to use, I guess. So, you're always going to have some chunks that are hard to compost down. I just move them out of the way. And that's why I go, when I want to use my compost pile, I move the first layer back, get the wheelbarrow in there, get out what I want, move the big pieces back and use that. And that's how I just move the big chunks back and forth. So back to the stalks. You know, if you were to use that method, just move them out of the way, and is what you would do. The more you turn your pile, the faster it will decompose. So if you want quick compost, turning it is going to be one of them. There's going to be other things you have to do, but one, you got to turn it. Moisture. Moisture is very important in your compost pile, and there's a lot of ways other than getting out there with the water hose and keeping your compost pile. There's a lot of clever things that you can add moisture to your compost pile, which I'll get to. Too little moisture slows it down. So if you're not going to ruin it, and first of all, you're never going to ruin, unless you put poison or something in it, you're never going to ruin your compost pile. You're just either going to correct what is wrong with it, and you'll get that as we go along. But if it's too dry, add wet. If it stinks, add more brown. If it, you know, there's always a way. You never say I've ruined my compost pile unless you've added something to it that you shouldn't have, or don't use a pesticide or anything like that in it. But just normal, keeping your compost pile going, you can't ruin it. I mean, there's always something you can do to balance it back out again. So, too little moisture slows it down, and it prevents the pile from heating up. Too much moisture will cause odors and oxygen levels to be depleted. So then you have an anaerobic environment, and when you cut oxygen off, you have the wrong microbes working for you, the ones you don't want, and that's why it stinks. That's what causes it to stink. Too much, you've cut off the oxygen, and you've got the wrong thing working for you. Good compost is as damp as a wrung out sponge. And that's the other day when I was working in my flower bed, that's what my soil was like. So you want to be able to pick up some compost, squeeze it in your hand, and stay squeezed up in that little ball, but you don't want water dripping out through. You want it as damp as a wrung out sponge. Good compost, I just said that. While building the compost pile, you will need to add water every 6 to 8 inches. So if you have a lot of stuff and you're going to start building it, which we're fixing to discuss in a minute, you're going to need to add water kind of as you go. And then from there, you've got it watered all the way down through there. And then after that, you can water. I have had to water mine with a water hose, but not very often. And then when we had the drought, we're on a well, we were conserving water, and I never watered. I mean, the compost was not a necessity. And I mean, when it started raining again, well, it just picked up and it just sat dormant during that time. And, but moisture is important. So other ways to get moisture into your compost pile, and these are great things you never even thought of. Your spaghetti water. I've got, we did pasta salad last night for supper, and my water, okay, I know this sounds icky, but hey, we're gardeners, right? We're trying to do a compost pile. My water is sitting on the stove for me to take out to the compost pile. Egg water, unless you're doing the Instapot thing.
Does it have salt? I mean, my spaghetti is
A
all
little,
salted.
yeah, but not a whole lot, right? So it's not going to.
Okay, just.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not too salty for you, that's not going to hurt it. I put olive oil in my water, and a little bit of oil is not going to hurt your compost pile.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that's not going to. Now, don't go out there with like if your salt's no good. Well, I don't know if salt ruins, but
Yeah.
you don't want to go out there and put a layer of salt. Cooking salt and seasoning, it's not enough to. Your boiled egg water, if you're still doing eggs in water, that's good to add moisture to your compost pile. And I always say this, in the spring, my egg water goes to the hummingbirds and stuff. I make my hummingbird food out of boiled egg water because it adds a little bit of calcium to the water, and that helps with their eggs during egg laying season. So during the spring, I like the Instapot for having eggs, but I'll in the spring go ahead and just do them in the water just so that my hummingbirds get a little extra. I know, and they're about gone. They're just about to migrate out of here, but just a little, just a little thing to help nature there. Another thing, I've got juice. Don't throw your juice away. It's got sugar and all that. Man, those microbes are going to go crazy. I have a 32 deal of apple juice that's expired. I didn't use it. I have it set to the side, and when I get a chance, I just ran across it day before yesterday. I hadn't had a chance to walk out there. But that's where it's going. It's not going to go in the trash or down the sink. It's going to go on the compost pile, and I'm just going to walk around the compost pile and spread it around. The other thing, flat cokes. Don't be throwing your flat cokes down the sink.
Really?
Oh my goodness, a compost pile loves that sugary flat coke. And so you especially if you buy the liters, they go flat before you drink them, and that goes to your compost pile. And that I always, no, that's the molasses, but it's along the same line. You like to, every once in a while a candy bar tastes good to you, and it's a little special treat. And I'll get to molasses is another thing. The flat cokes and the molasses and all of that. I mean, that's like, giving your compost a little extra treat there. So anyway, so those are some ways you can add moisture and not just use the water hose in order to do it. So, and there's probably a couple of others that I haven't thought about. Temperature and warmth. Okay, this is where you're going to decide what kind of composter do you want to be. If you want to be a hot composter, or if you want to be a lazy composter and compost cold. Temperatures between 120 and right at 160, let's say 159. Composting is the most effective. That's when your microbes are the most happiest, and they are really working for you at that temperature. Temperatures below 55 degrees, bacteria becomes dormant. So that's why in the wintertime, of course we don't have that cold of winters here, but in the wintertime, that's why it's so hard to compost sometimes, because if the pile drops below 55, I doubt it probably does very much. But if you're a composter, I mean, there's nothing neater to see than on a fall morning when it's really cool outside, and to walk out there and your compost pile is steaming. You can just see steam rising up from your compost pile. So you know it's heated up. I mean, it's got some heat in it at that point in time if you're seeing steam. Temperatures of 140 degrees will kill most weed seeds and disease organisms. So if you're going to co-compost, you need to be careful what weeds go in there, because you will spread your weeds if you're not going to hot compost. So you do need to be careful about that. Stuff that I'm just like, ooh, that might spread something I burn, but it doesn't go in the compost. Most of my composting is going to be kitchen scraps and stuff rather than yard trimmings. And temperatures in excess of 140 may kill your good microbes. Now that doesn't mean they can't come back, but if you get temperatures over 140, you're looking at killing possibly some of your good microbes. If your temperature gets over 160, you need to go out there and turn it and release the excess heat. If your compost gets to 160, call me. I've never seen one get to 160 degrees. Now, how do you know what degree? How do you even know what degree your compost is? Well, guess what they have? This is a compost thermometer. It looks just like the meat thermometer, and it just has a longer deal, and that's how you can tell what, as you can see, I don't ever use it. I forget about it. It goes with my Master Gardener stuff, and then I don't think about it again until this time next year. It was $15 is what I paid for. I got it at my class that I took to get certified. And so they do have, like I said, they've got something for everything.
Oh,
yes, they indeed. So that's how you know what temperature your compost is. Okay, to achieve the optimal temperature of 140 degrees, your compost pile must be at least 3 feet square. Now this is where my compost pile goes, square, goes wrong. Mine is too long. Narrow-wise, it's fine, but it's too long. and I can't get it to heat up because it's too big. There again, where I get compost, I get plenty of compost. So, you know, this is if you wanna heat it up and get it going good. It needs to be at least 3 feet square. The best results are obtained when it's 4 or 5 feet square at the bottom and it rises up to 4 on top. So it's wider at the bottom and it's narrower at the top, like a pyramid. Now you can do this in an enclosed. Mine is 10. It's set with I forget what the wood is, but it's 10 is what mine is. And like I said, it was just an experiment to see if it would even work, and it's been like that for over 10 years. It is starting to, 10 is starting to show a little bit of rust and stuff, but I mean, it's over 10 years old. So that is how, and you get it narrowed down like that, you can probably get it to heat up pretty easily and get compost a little quicker. Like I said, mine's probably 6 or 7 feet long, and it's just too long, and I just can't get. Richard, yours is
mine. I used livestock panels, and I cut them to about 3 foot length. So I've got the 3 foot square, but they're made out of livestock panels.
And how are you reaching it once you get ready to use it?
Whenever I made mine, I put a little drop door in the front.
Okay.
So I've either got the drop door or, you know, with using the livestock panels, I've just wired them together. So if I need to get way down into it, I'll just unwire the front and...
That's another thing you need to keep in mind, accessibility. Don't make it to where it's too hard to get to and you're not going to use it. That's another thing about keep it simple, simple, simple. You know, you want to keep it where you're going to use it. So,
where someone had used pallets.
yes, I think I have 3 or 4 on your handout directions. Oh, and we'll go over each one of them in just a minute.
Can you just say what goes in? I feed most of my stuff to my chickens. So
I know, and you're going, yeah, you have a dilemma. You really do. Does it go to the compost pile or does it go to the chickens?
I know. It's free food.
Exactly. Temperatures will decrease toward the outside of the pile. When turning the pile, pull the outside materials towards the middle. That only makes sense. You know, if it's on the outside and it's not doing but just scoot it up towards the middle. Okay, now we know the theory, and now what do you put in it? Let's build our compost pile. So what makes the compost pile work is a carbon and a nitrogen ratio. So the rule of thumb is 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Now, I don't measure. Eyeball everything. I don't like math, and if I have to use math in gardening, then I'm just not going to garden. I garden to relax, and I do not want to have to do mathematical equations while I garden. So I eyeball. You're going to know. You know, so basically you just want more brown than you do green while you're layering it. And just kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be precise. It's going to compost. If it's not composting enough, add more green. You know, if it's wet and slimy and yucky, add more brown. And so the brown materials add carbon nutrients to provide energy. So that's what the brown materials do. And we'll go over the difference between green and brown. Green materials add nitrogen nutrients to provide protein food. So you have energy and protein. There again, balance, balance, balance. But it doesn't have to be perfect. But that is your ratio, and that's what you're going to be adding to your compost pile. So everything will fall in one of those 2 categories. So microbes need carbon for energy and nitrogen for growth. So that's how your microbes use it. And your job is to supply the microbes with both kinds of material in the proportions that they prefer. Now, we're not talking about perfection here. So just, again, eyeball it. And you can do a pretty good job by just eyeballing it. Materials for composting are all around you. The best place to start is at your home, right in your kitchen, is the best place to start. So now we're going to learn the differences between nitrogen. Always remember nitrogen, it's a living object, kind of, sort of. Carbon, it's basically dead. And it's kind of how I was at first was, you'll get to where you won't even have to think about it. But here is your list. Coffee, I'm just going to go real quick. Coffee grounds, fruits and vegetables, grass clippings. If you're using weed and feed or anything like that, don't put leave your grass clippings on the ground. Or I have a greenhouse, and if I have abundance of grass clippings, I'll just put it around the greenhouse to suppress the weeds around the greenhouse. But I wouldn't even put grass clippings in my compost pile at all. They're just better used somewhere else. House plants, kitchen scraps, manure, prune materials, tea bags, and eggshells. So, coffee grinds. Don't ever, 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 ever throw your coffee grinds away. Along with the paper, the little paper thing that you liner, it goes in the compost pile. It goes in the compost pile. Fruits and vegetables, those are kind of obvious. You also need to remember, while we're adding, the bigger the chunks are, the longer it'll take to decompose. Now, I don't sit there and chop up all that stuff, you know. It pretty well goes in there how it ended up in the can. I have used many different. I have not yet found anything to store until you get it to the compost pile. I just haven't found anything that I'm absolutely in love with, so I'm constantly switching. Right now I'm using a Folgers can that you get at Sam's, the big Folger, or coffee, I guess. I'm not promoting Folgers. The big coffee can. I throw my stuff during the day in there, and the evening, hopefully I don't wait too late when I clean up the kitchen. I've gathered everything for the day, and then I take it out in the evening to the compost pile. And if something happens and it doesn't get taken to the compost pile, that's what your lid's for. And I always put the lid on there because I just have this horrible vision of roaches partying at night in my kitchen. And so I don't want to add, not that I have roaches, but I just don't want to add, I just don't want bugs, you know, having, so. But remember to take that sucker off because you cut off the end of the oxygen in there. So I will just put the lid on overnight and then the next morning because, you know, life happens. And that's the container. I've used that container. I have bought the one from Gardener Supply that's a crock that sits on your, now this sits in my sink. That sits on your cabinet. It does have a lid, but it has holes for air. It also has a biodegradable liner that you can buy, which I detested. I didn't like them, but. And then I go through phases where I don't like the coffee. The coffee can takes up one side of my sink. I'll use that for a little while, and then I decide I don't like that sitting on my cabinet. And then I'll go to a bucket on the floor. I switch up a lot, but I have not found anything that I'm perfectly pleased with if storing my scraps during the day. What do you use, Richard?
I use a little bucket like what's sitting over on the table.
Well,
and yeah, I'm like you. I mean, is it perfect? No, but it does.
Right. I just, you know.
Then it was a free bucket.
Right. So, you know, just be inventive. I don't, in order to, but I don't go to the compost pile but one time. Okay, if I'm canning or whatever, I may go 3 or 4 times a day. On an average day, I only go to the compost pile one time, generally.
You put this the seeds in it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And y'all get all kinds of neat stuff. I have grown tomatoes, spaghetti squash, acorn squash, pumpkins, and I just let them grow. Depends on how picky you are. I let them grow. Especially if they're viney, I just do the vines up and down and then I move a leaf to put my compost in. It helps kind of keep the sun, shaded a little bit, your compost pile. But I let stuff grow. So I've grown a lot of vegetables in my compost pile. You're going to be surprised what roots. Yes, all my seeds go in the compost pile. House plants. Be sure you know what happened to that house plant. Was it your neglect? If you even suspect it has a disease of any kind, don't put it in your compost pile. You'll spread that disease like wildfire. So be sure you know what happened. Your kitchen scraps, manure, they're kind of getting away from manure now. I don't know because it's getting so hard to find cow manure or whatever without your source. Because if they've used Grazon on their pastures or anything like that, it's gonna be in your compost and it'll kill your garden. Many people have made that horrible mistake, and I mean some of their gardens, it's been 5 years before they were able to re-garden in that spot again. Wow. Be very careful there's alternate things you can do other than adding manure, but they're kind of trying to get away from that. I just kind of assume maybe that's what it is. It's just so hard to find pure manure without added stuff. Prune materials, just remember on that, the bigger it is, the longer it'll take to compost. I'm not saying a stick or two doesn't make it in my compost pile, but I just move it over to the side if it does, just on your prune materials. Also, if it's got a seed or whatever, remember even your kitchen scraps, that those seeds could sprout. So tea bags, a lot of people don't think about the tea bags. Tea bag, the whole entire thing can go in that little staple that holds the string. It's not big enough to hurt anything. It's going to decompose. So I don't even worry about taking that staple out. It'll take care of itself. It's so little. Eggshells. Never throw your eggshells away. I mean, they compost pile. Another thing I do during the spring, because I feed the birds and everything, I will wash the eggshells on this, crush them up real small, and I'll feed it with my bird seed. The female birds will eat the eggshells. Again, that adds a little bit of calcium to their food, and it helps with their egg wall. When they lay eggs, it helps with a stronger egg wall. So that's kind of your nitrogen, so you can kind of see. Spaghetti, you can do pasta, spaghetti, leftover spaghetti. You can do cake. Oh, wow. You can do leftover that. You can do all that. One thing you do need to remember on that too, critters. And that's why you don't add meat or dairy. Now, it does not bother me to have a raccoon go through my compost pile. Depends on you how you feel about it. Actually, I have a family raccoon that lives in our barn that, possums. Possums are my favorite. But anyway, so I don't mind feeding, if you do not, make sure you do not want any critters, you need to bury your scraps. So you just go out there, dig a hole, bury it, dump it in there and cover it over, and that'll take care of it. I don't put dairy, but I do put meat in my compost pile. I have a dog who follows me out there every time I go, and that's her treat. She finds the meat in the compost pile and thinks it's great. And anyway, so I do put meat in mine because it's a treat for the dog. It's just a thing the dog and I do.
She's helping you turn your pile.
Right.
She digs for you. That's so cool.
So, anyway, so that's your nitrogen. So you kind of get an idea, you know, your nitrogen's going to be kind of wet and slimy, you know, material. Now we're going to talk about the carbon. Dried leaves. Dried leaves are a gardener's gold. I mean, they are absolutely the best free thing that you can absolutely have. Now, in the oak trees, people are concerned about oak trees. That's all I have, and I have never had a problem with anything with oak leaves. It takes them a little bit longer to break down, but I have not had any problems with oak leaves at all. Now remember, the bigger the leaf, the longer it will take. My husband runs over ours with he has an X mark, and he runs over and chops them down. I load them up and put them in the compost pile. They're also a great mulch. That's what I used for mulch forever and ever. If you're using your leaves in your flower bed, 2 cautions that I just always feel like I have to say: copperheads and termites. You want to be careful that if you're using, and I would say even anything wood up against your house, you want to pull it back just a little bit. I don't know how bad the termite situation is here. I'm from Houston. Termites was something you always thought about, but you do pull it away. Don't put your flower bed and your wood, anything, right up next to your house. Of course, copperheads, I live down 811 going towards Crockett, which it is copperhead country. It is not unusual for me to see a copperhead in my flower bed whatsoever. I'm not scared of them, but you do need to be cautious. They will blend in and you'll never see them.
Found a water moccasin,
Yeah.
huge one, right out my back door, and found 3 copperheads.
Yeah, and they're on the move right now because they're looking for their winter, their winter spot. Once again, y'all, snakes are bad. Snakes are good. They serve a good purpose. I know people hate them, but they serve a good purpose. So remember that when you don't kill them all. Now I get mad when my husband kills them, but I do understand. I have a grandson that runs around. Now we live on top of a hill, so a water moccasin is very unusual for us to see at our house, but a copperhead is not. So I don't want to know about it. Just don't tell me. But any other snake, he stays alive, and because they do good, they really do a lot of good. So now I'm off on snakes, but hay is another. I mean, it is fantastic for more for a mulch, I think, than for compost. But know your source. Know your source. Know what's been on that hay, because you could ruin your garden or your flower bed for a long time. A good way to know if your hay, like sometimes I'll buy bales up here at Centerville Feed. I'll ask them, but I don't always trust what they tell me. If you'll take a cup and put it full of hay, wet it down really good, get some radish seeds, and you use radish seeds because they sprout so quickly. Sprinkle the radish seeds on top of that hay, and if they sprout, you're good to go.
Oh, wow.
So that's a good way to know if your hay is any good. But I strongly, in your compost pile, you also need to do it thin. Spread it out real thin. Don't do it very thick. I prefer to use hay in the walkways of the garden. I feel like it's better used as a mulch in the garden than it is in the compost pile. But it is an option. Newspaper. People don't think about newspaper. Newspaper now is made with soy ink, and there is nothing wrong. It is not harmful. No shiny newspaper. Put a layer of newspaper and wet it down. It's wonderful for your garden. Go ahead.
Cardboard?
Cardboard,
Lots of
yes.
cardboard boxes.
Yes, be careful though. You don't want to get it too thick. Because again, and wet it down really good. But yes, cardboard is
magazine.
not if it's shiny. No shining. Cardboard is excellent to start a new flower bed. I started a flower bed in front of my greenhouse, and just, well, one side I had cardboard, layered cardboard, and then put mulch on top of that and let it sit for a season. The other side I ran out of cardboard and I used newspaper, and I just layered a thick layer of newspaper, put mulch on top of, wet it down, put mulch on top of it. You have to wait a season, but it beats you getting out there but cardboard and newspaper are wonderful to start a new flower bed with. You just have to think ahead on it.
We had a program at the expo, and Richard told me about that, and so we fed the kids, and we had food from Pizza Hut, and I took every one of the pizza boxes home, and I didn't do anything. I just threw those pizza boxes down, put mulch on top, put landscape timbers around it, and put plants in them, and I have never had a weed.
Right,
Never
right.
had a
I
weed.
didn't have in my herb bed, the cardboard one, the newspaper, I got weeds a little quicker, but it took a long time. If you're impatient, you can cut a hole out of it and plant your plant, or plant your plant and cut the cardboard around it, or what.
But those pizza boxes are so thin,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't take anything
Yeah.
to plant there.
Yeah,
at
and that's
all.
a good use.
That's
Yes.
so good, thank y'all.
Oh, hey,
That was Richard's, not
tips.
mine.
I mean, aren't they wonderful?
Oh, yeah.
I know.
A lot to get rid of in this
Oh,
one.
straw. Straw just isn't around in these
Where do you
parts.
find it?
Tree bark and wood chips. Those are excellent for your garden, but remember, they're going to take a lot longer to break down. Another thing in small quantities and thin layer is your ashes from your wood stove. But you want to be careful because you'll get too much phosphate in your soil. So just in small layers, you can use the ashes from your wood stove.
Go back in the fireplace.
That's what I have a wood stove. I have a fireplace.
That works, yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
So are you seeing now? There is a lot of products that you can use to build a compost pile. And I have thought about that before. If you had chickens, how would you?
Well, you gave me a lot of
Just
things because a lot of things I don't give the chickens. They're not really
Okay.
interested in. They don't care about green beans. They don't care about onion skins.
Okay, so
So there are a lot of things you gave me good options. Thank you.
good. Leaves. I gave leaves the whole thing, a whole slide for themselves. Pound per pound, leaves contain twice the mineral content than manure. So there's one of your substitutes for manure that you can use, leaves. It improves aeration and the structure of most soils. And like I said, leaves is what I mostly have used for mulch up until this year. Grind or shred leaves to hasten their decay. They also can be used as a mulch. You just on the grinding, just remember the bigger, the longer it will take. I don't like the look of whole leaves in the flower bed. It looks like I haven't raked my flower bed. If you grind them up and then put them in there, I like that look better, but that's just my pickiness. But and so if you wanted to use them as a mulch and you didn't like how it looked, right, rake them out and run the lawnmower over them and see if you like them better that way. But they do, I don't know, it looks a bit unkept to me. Leaves provide so many free services, and it's something every fall you have, Molasses. People don't think about molasses. Now, I'm talking about horticultural molasses that you can buy at the feed store, but don't think you can't use grandma's molasses, because I just have a couple of recipes that I use that for, and it a lot of times expires on me before, because I just use it so very often. I don't waste it. I will go put it out, but it's cheaper if you're going to add a little tree. Give them, like you give your dogs treats, give your compost a little treat. of the horticultural molasses. It comes in a bucket, and you can just, it comes dry and it comes like syrup, and you can just sprinkle it. I like the liquid and just pour it over your compost pile but it gets the microactivity going. They just really like it. It's rich in carbohydrates as well as mineral nutrients. It comes dry or in liquid. Use 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Oh, this is your fire. This is a fire ant recipe. Now notice it says repellent, not kill them. It just repels them. But this is a natural fire ant recipe if anybody's interested. It's 1 cup of molasses per gallon of water. That kills weeds, but it may take several applications. So I guess you would use the granular for the fire ant, and then if you wanted the weed one, you could use the
Isn't that what they do over here at that plant there between Centerville and Buffalo?
I don't know. Is that what I
Yeah,
have no
at that
idea.
Ridley block, they do make livestock feeds, and they do use a lot of molasses.
Oh, really? I didn't.
Wow, cool.
But there again, like I said, molasses is just it's just like eating a candy bar for your. It's just a nice special little treat for your compost pile. Now, some uncommon items to compost that you may not even think could go in there that can. Blood meal and bone meal. But blood meal and bone meal a lot of times is better to me if you wait till it's finished, get your wheelbarrow load, and I have a recipe of how much to put per wheelbarrow load in a slide or two down. And then mix it with your compost once it's finished. But it is a manure substitute if you want to use it in the pile. Citrus peels, a lot of people don't think about citrus peels. They can go in there. Corn cobs can go in there, but if you don't shred them, it takes a little while for them. But I don't. I throw them in there when I do cream corn or whatever. I put them in the compost pile. They do decompose. And if you ask me, they decompose quite quickly, but not as quick as something smaller. And hair is an excellent thing to no pet hair, and especially if you're using any kind of flea product and the hair that you'd have to use would be virgin hair, no hair dyes, no perm, but hair is an excellent to put in your compost pile, but it cannot be dyed or permed, any kind of chemicals.
What is blood meal?
What is blood? Blood meal and bone meal are a animal byproduct. So bone meal is and mostly I believe they're cows is how they make it. Bone meal is I guess where they grind up the bones into and blood meal. I don't even want to think about what blood meal is.
And byproducts of the processing.
Yeah,
of
there
the
you go.
processing facilities. So.
I don't even want to think about it. Pea shells and vines. Your pea vines are excellent source of nitrogen. But personally, I feel like the shells go in the compost pile. But my vines go pull up, lay down, pull up, lay down, and then they decompose. It's used as a mulch. And then the next year I'll plant where the vines are laid down and just work it like that. But the vines are an excellent mulch in your garden just to pull them up and just lay them down right where they are. The pea shells are, and your compost pile loves those pea shells. Pine needles. Personally, I think pine needles are better used as a mulch than compost. They do have that waxy substance on it. Takes it longer for them to break down. As far as changing the acid value, it doesn't. That I have read that I have never used them because I have oak trees, not pine trees. So, but I have read, and I'm just going to leave it at that it does not change the acid level of your flower bed. But I cannot speak from experience on that. Waste from your aquariums, that's another one people don't think about. If you have a fish aquarium, that's another source of moisture. I mean, I do use fish emulsion to fertilize my foliage house plants with. That's what I use to fertilize them with. So a lot of people don't think about waste from aquariums. And kitchen wastewater, there again, your spaghetti water, your egg water, and that's, if you do the rice in the bags and not do the old-fashioned kind of rice. Another thing that I'll tell you that my compost pile absolutely loves, and that's shrimp hulls. And then the shrimp water, once we're through with it, those hulls will be gone in no time. I mean, they decompose quick. And so, and the crab, we just have crabs once a year at Christmas. And all the crab legs and that sort of stuff goes in the compost pile. I'm sure a few raccoons and possums may get a couple of them.
How you keep your dogs from bothering?
I don't know. She doesn't. I don't know if she just thinks that the meat thing, because she goes to the compost pile when I go and there's generally a little bit of meat. My dog does not bother the compost pile at all, and I don't bury my food. Now, if you think your dog's going to be a problem, you need to bury your food when you take it out there.
What's the problem I have with my flower beds? The dogs go in the flower bed.
Yes, I'm lucky in that sense with her that she doesn't bother my flower bed or my Now, I have had dogs in the past that have, but this one that we have now doesn't. Manure, we'll just in case you want to use manure, we'll go over that real quick. Chicken manure is your hottest of all the manure. If you get, and that just also, if you get mushroom in Madisonville, mushroom dirt or what a load of mushroom compost, you need to let it sit a year because it's hot. You need to, so it needs to sit a year before you use it. So you need to think ahead on that. Horse manure is also considered a hot manure. It's richer in nitrogen than cow manure is, but it needs to be mixed with other manures and water because it's prone to fermentation. I've heard people that in class before that told me they've used horse manure forever with no problem. I have no experience with horse manure, so but it is considered a hot manure, so I would think you would need to be a little bit careful with it and not to burn up your plants. Cow manure is considered a cold manure, so you can use it pretty well right away. It's moisture and less concentrated, and it ferments much slower than all the other manures. There's your 2 cups of bone meal for each wheelbarrow load. Instead of adding manure to your compost pile, you can do that. And to help with your manure source, which your manure is what helps heat it up, heat your compost pile up. Okay, materials to avoid. There are some materials that you do need to avoid that when I said you can't ruin it, well, some of these you can. So, of course, human feces and pet waste, that's obvious, but I have had people ask me, not human, pet waste before. Diseased plants or weeds that have seeds, you know, we talked about that earlier. It's not going to ruin your compost pile, but you may get a plant where you don't want it. It may sprout where you don't want you lay your compost out. Large amounts of grease and oil. Some grease and some oil is going to get in your compost pile. You're not going to prevent it, but don't go out there after you fried a big pan of okra and pour your grease on the compost pile. Some grease gets in it. It's not going to hurt it. The main thing is you're calling varmints to it if you use it. Is the main thing on that one, is to keep varmints away. materials that do not decompose readily unless shredded first. Well, it's just going to take longer for the stuff to decompose. It won't ruin your compost pile. Troubleshooting. So, let's say you've done all that and you're having some problems and you have a foul odor. Well, you've got too much moisture. So turn the pile and add brown material. So that's all. So that fixes that. You know, just add a little bit of brown. A pneumonia odor is the same thing. You just have too much nitrogen, add more brown material. A low temperature, the pile's too small, too little moisture, it could be several things. A little aeration, enlarge the pile, add water, and turn. There again, it's going to compost if it has a low temperature. You know, it's not earth-shattering. If it does, it's just going to take it longer to compost. A high temperature, the pile's too large, too much nitrogen, so you want to either reduce the size of the pile or add more brown materials to it, than if the temperature's too high.
You don't have probably ants. The ants don't bother in there.
No, I've never had ants in my compost pile.
I was wondering that. I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah,
never.
Good question, because I have ants a lot.
I
I don't
oh, okay.
Do you have ants in your compost pile?
Every now and then I've seen some. I've not seen fire ants, but I've seen some other ants in there. They just help break down stuff.
Yeah, but the fire, you're worried about going out there and getting bit
I
up
just don't
by,
like
yeah.
bugs.
Yeah, no, I've not seen fire
Now
ants.
you're gonna have some critters in your compost pile, so you're gonna have springtails and some other, you know, the first time I went out and dug a shovel into mine and all these little bugs, I panicked and freaked out. You need those bugs. They are very important. They help break stuff down. So, but I have never had problem with ants, and I've never had trouble with roaches in mine.
Wow.
So.
I was digging a hole one time just to plant some stuff. I dug up some baby snakes.
Dear God.
Yeah, I got going real quick.
That would be in a hole.
Digging up a hole, and I dug up
You're just digging a hole and saw baby snakes.
about 6 of them.
I'd have burned my house down. There's no
It's
way.
like, I don't
Oh,
dig
we're gonna
over
get
there
you
anymore.
liking snakes if that's a
I'm
last.
better.
She is better.
I'm better.
I don't like none
I
of the
better.
snakes. I don't like snakes.
Okay, pests. Do not add meat or dairy and bury your food. Will keep pests from bothering your compost pile. All right, now, okay, building your compost pile. Now we're going to build it. So you're going to begin with a brown layer. Now, if you didn't, it's not ruined. Just from this point on, just carry on with how it's supposed to be, and it'll be fine. But you add a brown layer, then a green layer. So brown layer, green layer, brown 3 to 1. So you want 3 brown, 1 green. 3 brown, 1 green. And be sure all materials are chopped or shredded. There again, you know, I don't mean to be a broken record. It's going to compost if it's not. 2 shovelfuls of finished compost and mix. Why do you think you would want? Now, this is not absolutely necessary, but why do you think that you'd want to put some already finished compost in
To
there?
start it.
To start it, to get it. It's got microbes in it. It just gives it a jump start. It's not earth-shattering if you don't do it. Add water. All right, continue to build the pile, alternating the layers until you have 3 or 4 square feet. That's where it comes in. You don't have to even have it contain. Dr. Novak, that used to be in the horticultural, he was more, horticultural department at A&M, but he was a vegetable guy. He tended the gardens at A&M before they did the big thing that they've done. And when you go tour the gardens at A&M, he'd have all these little piles that were 3 foot, 4 foot, all over the garden. And instead of having one central location where his interns would shovel it and wheel it all around, well, he had all these little different, they all look like little coffins everywhere, but he would just in these strategic, and he had nothing. He just on the ground, and they just started building it and built it up. And that's how he composted on the A&M in the A&M gardens. And then every week turn the pile and add water if needed. So the only times I've ever got the water, and if you go out there with the water hose, if you got either a soaker hose, of course, or the back and forth, but at low, not up very high, and just move it around if you need the water. Going out there and doing this isn't doing anything. Isn't doing anything. All right, now then, what types of structures? There again, you don't have to have a structure. When we first composted, we didn't. We just had a little pile. When my husband told me, let's start taking the scraps and do a compost and put this here, I thought he was nuts. But then after a while, I was like, oh, I see what we're doing here. So on your paper, on your handout, you should have the wood and wire bin, a pallet bin, a circle bin, a movable, and a 3-bin system. Okay, the wood and wire bin is okay as far as I'm concerned. It's gonna rot pretty quick. It's not all that efficient, I don't think. The pallet bin is where you get the oak pallets and build a compost pile. There again, it's gonna in a few years it's gonna disintegrate. The circle bin is where you get some wire, although I think Richard has the better idea of instead of being a circle and square. The circle bin is where you get, I think is it chicken wire on there? I think it's how on the circle bin on the page where you just do a circle. When you can do it with chicken wire and just do a circle. There again, how are you going to get to it? It's not, it'll pile up nicely. How are you going to get to the bottom? You want something that you are going to be easy to get to, or you're not going to use it. The movable bin is pretty, I think is that the one made with concrete blocks? The concrete, the movable. Yeah, I like that idea. I think that's a pretty good idea. There again, you would, you want easy access in there. But you see how they have the different, there's different cut off in different sections. Well, that's so that you have one that's working and one that's finished all the time. And that's your ultimate way to do it, is always have one that's working, but then have one that's finished that you can be using. Of course, it will take a little while, to get that going.
Do y'all use cinder blocks ever?
I love cinder blocks. I use cinder blocks for various things, but not the compost pile. That's what I would like my compost pile to be out of.
And so just put them so that they're sideways so the air can get through?
It doesn't really matter. Just stack them up however you want to, but I love cinder blocks. And the one thing I really like about them is you can plant in the holes. I've known people that have lined their gardens in cinder blocks and then grew strawberries in the holes.
Okay.
And then you have the 3-bin system, which is pretty close to the movable bin there. But the ultimate is to have a system, and that is to have one finished, and you're always working on one, and then that way you have a readily, whenever you want it, you have compost. Okay, that's the conclusion of my compost. Do y'all have any questions so far? We'll take a break. And so my last slide is, you're a master gardener when you always carry a shovel and plastic bag in your truck as emergency tools. You spend more time chopping your kitchen greens for the compost pile than cooking. Your fruit drawer, this one I'm terribly guilty of, your fruit drawer in your fridge is full of seeds. When we go somewhere, my husband will not allow me to take my pruners or any of that stuff because I'm either snipping something to make an arrangement out of, or I'm trying to start a plant. And he's like, when we used to ride motorcycles, it was like the saddlebags, no, no pruning shears, no seed heads, none of that stuff goes in the saddlebags. But anyway, so.
Amazing.
And I mean, before we get started back, just a reminder, next week, we'll meet here about 9. I will have the van, so if we all want to ride together, we can. If you want to follow along, you can do that as well. So don't feel like you have to ride in the van. If you want to follow and then go shopping or whatever afterwards, you're certainly welcome to do that. But
I better ride in a van.
Be cheaper.
Yeah.
We're riding the van. Y'all are stuck with me again.
It's been nice,
I
but
had a good time, but I'm yes, I did now. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Oh, you are welcome. You are welcome. I love doing this. Okay, I know this is a subject not everybody is going to be interested in, but look, you need the hours, and you'll learn enough that you're ever in a conversation with somebody who loves worms. You might can kind of give them a few pointers or something if they're having trouble. But so we're going to talk about vermicomposting. Okay, is it vermicomposting or worm bin? Vermicomposting basically is just a fancy word for worm bin. Okay, earthworms are one of the most ancient invertebrates on the earth. So, I mean, have you ever given earthworms a thought? Nobody thinks much about them. There are over 3,100 species known of earthworms, but only 12 to 15 species are used in vermiculture. So you are going to use a special worm in order to do vermiculture. First of all, do you know why we even do vermiculture or what worm bin? You're using the castings as fertilizer. So, and the castings is their poop, is what that is. For some people don't realize that that's what it is. But anyway, so you're growing worms, you're harvesting their castings, and you're using it for fertilizer. It is a precious, precious commodity. It takes a little while to get enough castings in order to use for fertilizer, or at least in a worm bin like what Richard brought his. I don't have any worms right now. Last year my parents were ill, and I spent most of my time in Houston, and in between during the week I was gone, and during that time mine disintegrated. And I have not got back into it. I plan on it, but right now, once again, I'm teaching you this, and I don't have any worms, but I'm going to get some from Richard here just any time. But anyway, so there's only 12 to 15 species that can be used in vermiculture. So you have to use the red wigglers. Those are composting worms, and they are not earthworms that dig down into they're not in the ground at all. So don't think you can go home, dig you up a bunch of worms and put them in a worm bin, because they're going to come out of there 90 to nothing. You need the particular red wigglers, and they live, they're called composting worms or manure worms, because they live on the surface underneath manure. So they never dig down in the ground. They kind of just live between the ground and manure. Be it cow manure or rabbit manure. A lot of people that raise rabbits also raise worms underneath the rabbit cage. Okay, red worms are not earthworms. Only the red worms can be used in vermiculture. Red worms process a large amount of organic material in their natural environment of manure, compost piles, and decaying leaves. Red worms are very tough and can withstand being held, although they don't like it. But when I used to go to the school, idea. I was known as the worm lady at the schools for a while, and the kids, of course, I'd let them handle them, and the boys would run around the room chasing the girls, and but they can withstand being held fairly well. They were awfully relieved when we went home, but they did put up with the kids. Okay, once again, we're back to worms need the same thing that we need. Once again, they need air, moisture, bedding, and correct temperature. So they pretty well have the same requirements that we do. Air. Worms use oxygen in their bodily process, producing carbon dioxide just as we do. Worms breathe through their skin. So they don't have lungs and they breathe through their skin.
Thank you so much.
It is important that air circulates around the inside of your worm bin. So, I mean, of course, if it didn't, once again, you would create an anaerobic environment and not much but yet lives in that. So, moisture. All worms need moisture. They breathe through their skin, so they have to stay moist. You know, anytime if you dig up a worm or whatever, they're always kind of wet, aren't they? And they're never really dry. Ooh, when they dry out little leather things. I mean, it's just like, which we'll get to that, but worms wiggle and move by squeezing their muscles around. So they just kind of squiggle, kind of like a snake does. Also, worms don't have teeth, of course. So, I mean, how do they eat? Well, they use their tail and they swoosh around and they push and they suck in the food. All right, Joe Fran, we're going to get you liking worms yet.
All right.
These are the same type of worm that people used to go fishing with?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
They're a type of they're in the same species.
Okay.
I think those are European worms, that most of them, and then the European worms and the red wigglers can be used in vermicomposting.
The reason why I said that because we were growing up a lace raised worm.
Yeah. But temperature. Worms feed and convert waste best at temperatures between 59 and 77 degrees. And they do, when they're in that optimal temperature, they are just really moving along and eating and laying eggs and all that kind of stuff. The temperature in most bedding is lower than the surrounding air because of evaporation. The moisture from the bedding has a cooling effect. So when you're putting worms in one of these bins, you have to have a bedding for them. And we'll get back to this, but most of the time people use shredded newspaper as their bedding. That bedding has to stay wet in there. It cannot dry out. And so that's how it evaporates and has a cooling effect in there, is from that wet bedding. When temperatures drop below 45 degrees, their activity slows down. And they do. In the wintertime, they are slow movers. In the summertime, my worms would stay behind the wood stove because it was kind of near the kitchen and I could easily remember to feed them that way. Of course, they couldn't stay there while the wood stove was going, so in the wintertime, they stayed in my sewing room, and they would slow down immensely. So they don't do much once the temperatures drop below 50. And worms will freeze at 30. Mm-hmm. So if you can't stand the thought of your worms being in a bin in the house, you need to have it somewhere where they won't freeze.
So, sorry, if you raise rabbits outside.
Well, I'm supposing they're insulated by the manure, wouldn't you say, Richard?
Is that what's going on?
Yeah.
Because if you've got, not only do you have the manure, but you've got the warm urine that the rabbits are producing as well. So yeah, they're insulated by all of that.
Okay, bedding, a major component in your worm bin. The bedding is multifunctional. So you gotta have it because they need that covering. So it holds in the moisture. It provides a medium where worms can work, which they work up and they work down. They're constantly going up and down and moving around in there. They don't just stay in one spot. And it provides a place to bury food, and it provides a carbon source. So when you have a worm bin, you are definitely want to bury the food in your worm bin, because this time, if it's in the house, you definitely don't want to call in critters. So you do want to bury your food beneath the bedding in a worm bin. Also, just like mulch, the worm's bedding degrades down, and it's a food source for them also. So that's why the bedding can be multifunctional, because it provides almost a complete environment for them. Bedding needs to be light and fluffy to provide good air exchange through the depth of the container. So you will never smash it down. You will tear it up, which we'll get to that, but you'll tear it up into strips. You'll wet it, and when you put it in the worm bin, you want, excuse me, you'll want to fluff it. It's always fluffed up, a lot of air in between the soil or the castings, and that there needs to be a big space in there, and so you'll never smash it down. Each time you add new bedding, it adds an oxygen-rich layer, which helps the function of the worm bin. So, okay, bedding materials. Here again, you know, sometimes you can we can just think right out of the box there, and on what kind of materials. Most people use shredded newspaper, but you can use white computer paper. You can use shredded cardboard. Be careful with shredded cardboard though. If you get that bin too wet, those worms are coming out of there because they can't breathe. You've cut off their oxygen. So be careful with the cardboard putting. You don't want to get your bin too wet, and cardboard holds a lot of moisture. I never used cardboard in worm bin. I either did it making a new flower bed or in the compost pile. A thin layer of brown leaves. What that does, once again, just like a compost pile, that adds some nutrients immediately to the bedding. Plus, it also, until you get a good amount of castings, it gives them a place to go and hide. So, because they don't like light at all. So any kind of light, they're going to want to try to find a place to hide. So, like I said, you want a thin layer of leaves to start out with. And then after that, you don't need to do the leaves. Oh, well, this was bedding. You can use leaves. I'd be careful as far as the bedding. But putting leaves in there, I have done it before, but you do want a thin layer. The bedding should be wet, and guess what? As moist as a damp sponge. So we keep going back to that. The soil. Redworms in nature do not live in soil. They are found under the decaying leaves, rotten logs, and manure piles. It is recommended to add a handful of soil to the bedding when first starting a worm bin. Soil provides grit and a variety of beneficial bacteria and fungi. So that's why you want to add, what I would do was when I harvest my worm bin, I always made sure I kept back a small layer at the bottom, would kind of fluff it up, because it kind of does get compacted a little bit. And then I never took all of the castings out when I harvested the worm, when I harvested castings. I always left a little bit to start anew. And the worms do appreciate that too. You've disturbed them, they're unhappy, they don't like it, and as soon as you get them back in the worm bin, once you've harvested the castings, it helps them to settle down quicker. And then, again, you're getting the bacteria and fungi going back faster by leaving it. Okay, so let's say you want to build a worm bin. You can use a 10-gallon storage container like what Richard has over there. That's what I used. Richard's setup is a little different than mine, but it's pretty well close. Or you could use a wooden box or an in-ground bin. I would say a wooden box. I would do that outside. An in-ground bin, I know nothing about an in-ground bin. I wish I could find somebody that was knowledgeable of an in-ground bin, because I get a lot of people ask me and tell me that they would vermicompost if they could do it outside in the ground. When I get mine, I may go back to vermicomposting again. I may try, get some more information, I guess, sure, off the internet. That's, you can't, there isn't anything you can't find on the internet. And try in ground, because that is more appealing to people than doing it in the 10-gallon container a lot of times.
Now,
But
are y'all selling the worms, or are you just raising them for the fertilizer?
I don't sell mine, because you need worms constantly in your bin. There's a lot of worm sellers out there, but I always kept mine. And the neat thing about worms is it's a complete ecosystem on the inside, so they don't ever overpopulate. So they're getting this much food, they got this and they got that, so they know how many eggs to lay. So, okay, so when you harvest it, you're also unfortunately harvesting the eggs with it. So the worms, you put them back in there and they're like, oh, we don't have enough eggs, so they populate. So they always keep it, you never get overran, because they know how to keep their population in check, which I always thought was just such an interesting
I have a
thing.
question.
Smarter than people.
Excuse me. Where do you store yours, Richard? Where do you store
I
those?
keep mine in my garage or my workshop, which used to be a garage.
Okay, whatever container you use, it must have air holes in the top and bottom and in the sides in order to keep the air in. And when we get through, we'll walk over here and look at Richard's. He's got air holes punched all on the top lid and around the top portion. Now don't go too low, because you don't want your castings to come out of the hole. So you just want at the top is where, around the bin is where.
There's
Joke
worms
free.
in there right now.
Yes.
They're this close to me.
Right places.
Girl.
The lack of oxygen produces gases that give the bin an anaerobic atmosphere, which causes a foul-smelling odor, which is the same thing with compost. We're looking at the same thing here. You cut off the oxygen supply, and you're going to have a foul odor, and them suckers are going to start coming out of there by the droves. If they're unhappy, they're going to come out of there. The ideal worm bin is no more than 12 to 18 inches deep. The shallowness allows more nibbling surface, which, since earthworms like to feed upwards. So when you go to feed them, you're going to move the newspaper over, you're going to put the food there, and all the worms are going to go to that. And they're going to feed on that. And then the next week, you're going to either go to you're not going to feed in the same place. You're going to go to another corner of the bin, feed them there. Once they've ate all this, then they're going to move over here and they're going to eat on this. This way, you keep it from getting anaerobic by constantly moving it around. Also, it has to be broken down enough, or the bacteria and fungi have to work on the food enough to where the worms sometimes cannot eat it immediately. It's got to sit there a little while and get to a certain stage so that they can suck it in their mouths to eat. So when you first start out, I mean, after you get going, they may still be eating in this corner while this corner's, you know, breaking down, and then they move over here once you kind of get it going in a rhythm. All right, setting up your worm bin. You're going to a 10-gallon plastic container with holes in the top and the sides. You're going to put 2 hands full of soil or compost in the container. Again, that's to get your microbes going and kind of also to keep them happy. Place the bedding in the container until it's 3/4 full. So you always want the container 3/4 full with that paper. It doesn't take as much newspaper as you think, because you're going to take that newspaper, and what I used to do, newspaper has a bias, or it has a, and so I used to do it finger width and just tear it and just go down like that and just tear it. Tears in nice long strips. And then I would go to the sink and wet it really good, and then I would take it and get as, you know, squeeze it and then fluff it out and put it in the worm bin. But you always want 3/4 of that worm bin to have newspaper. Now in the hot summertime, I don't know if you find this true, but in the house, sometimes during the middle of the week, I'd have to go and spray the newspaper on top. It would kind of dry out just a little bit. The newspaper on the bottom was all, but on top, I might have to re-wet it just a little bit. Now, Richard has holes in the bottom of his to where if it leaches,
She's picking on me.
I'll be glad to trade places.
he would be able to capture that juice as it drips. Mine, I didn't have the bottom. Mine was enclosed, so I was always real careful about how much water, because I had no source to leak. So see, Richard's got his up on blocks, and then he has that bottom lid down there that captures. If too much water's in there, his can drip out. Now, if you do it that way, and you get some liquid down there, don't you dare throw it out. Water something with it, because that is liquid gold, and so be sure to use it. But so that's a way to help. You could have a little bit more water in there, knowing that it can escape if it needs to. The way I was doing it, it couldn't, so therefore I was very, very careful how much water. So my newspaper might have dried out a little quicker than what Richard's bedding does. Okay, you're going to dump the worms and distribute them evenly, leaving the light on for overnight, and will help move them to the bottom of the container. This is very important that you leave the light on. When I got my worms, I always say, well, first of all, I was going to show y'all. This is what my worms came in. Remind me of put me in the zoo. Filled with,
They said peat moss on here. Is that what it is?
Yes, I couldn't think of it. Filled with peat moss, and 1 pound of worms is about 1,500 worms.
Oh my God.
And they come in these little bags, and they only ship. So like right now, well, they may be shipping now. During the summer, they don't ship, and they only ship on Mondays, because that way, so the worms arrive to you alive.
Do you have a
and
source?
not. You know what? All my sources I had are out of business. If
Okay.
I know you won't believe this, but if you'll look up buying red wigglers and say East Texas,
Okay.
you'll come up with names, and but all the people I knew no longer are doing it. So they don't ship when temperatures are too high either. So it's almost a seasonal thing to get your worms. But talking about the worms crawling out of the bin and leaving the light on. The light, they just come from their happy place. They've been raising in manure and they're just as happy as they can be. Pound of them get scooped up and they get put in this bag. They get shipped in the U.S. mail and then you put them in that with just they're not happy and not happy at all. And so the light they don't like light. So when they're thinking they're going to escape and go back to their happy place, the light makes them go back down and stay back down. I learned the hard way on that. I always wanted to do worms, and when I took this compost class, one of the classes was a vermicultural class. I ordered my worms the next day after the class. And so my worms came in the mail, and I fixed up my deal. I had it set, but it was we weren't using the wood stove, so I set it on the hearth by the wood stove. I got up the next day and I had worms everywhere. And that's how I know when they get dried out there. It's just they're little leather things, little leather squirrel, little squiggles. So I'm like, okay, well that, I knew I had done everything right. I researched this and researched it. And so I gathered up what I could, threw away the crusty ones, got them settled again. So this was Thursday. So Thursday night, I get up Friday morning and they're out. They're out again. And I'm like, I'm going to lose all my worms. So I called the lady that I bought them from, and I told her, I said, I'm having trouble. I can't keep the worms in the bin. And they raised rabbits, and the worms were underneath the rabbits. And the lady told me, she said, well, now, honey, vermiculture's not for everyone. And I was like, do you know who I am? Animals love me. I'm known as Mother Nature. No, I'm not accepting that answer. And so she said, okay, try this. Go tonight, go in the bathroom, to somewhere where you can leave the light on all night long and leave the light on and do it for 2 nighs and see if that doesn't make them go down. Well, my daughter was going to come in from out of town that weekend. So Friday night, she gets in Friday night and we're getting ready to go to bed, and I tell them, okay, I'm leaving the bathroom light on all night, and I got to leave it on for 2 nights. So if somebody gets up in the middle of the night, don't turn the light off because it's supposed to make these worms go down in the bin. So backtrack just a little bit. At the time, I had a cockatoo parrot. I had an umbrella cockatoo.
You are Mother Nature.
And she was a rescue bird, and she was a feather mutilator. And so anyway, I was constantly having to get vet care for her. Anyway, and so my husband tells me that night, he said, okay, we will do this for 2 nights. We will do this worm thing for 2 nights. And he said, I'm going to tell you this now. We will not take those worms to the vet. We will not take them to a psychiatrist. They will go in the compost pile. So it worked. The light worked. My worms went down in there. They were happy. I never had another problem with them. So take my advice. Be sure you do the light for 24 hours. I waited for a couple of days until they were happy before I added my first little bit of food.
I hope your windows are up because it's
Mine
raining.
are, so I know I've been looking at it coming. Woo! Hot dog. Okay. Most growers ship worms in peat moss. Worms cannot be shipped in temperatures over 90. Worms are shipped at the first of the week, and they're purchased by weight and not numbers. So when you get your worms, you're going to get eggs, you're going to get adult worms, you're going to get teenagers, you're going to get, a whole variety in that pound of worms. Okay, now we need to know how to feed our worms. So worms eat 1/4 to 1/2 of their body weight a day. And food needs to be chopped to start the decomposing process. So when you're feeding your worms, you do need to make sure that you chop your food up, more so than the compost pile. Overfeeding can create an anaerobic environment. Feed only 2 cups of scraps per week per 10-gallon container. What I did was I had an old espresso coffee pot, and I would fill that up, and then I know that that's enough. I don't need to. Then I read somewhere where what I liked better, it was a little more time consuming, but I liked it better, is when I got a bunch of scraps, filled up my can, I'd get a bunch of scraps, I would run them through the food processor, and I would make balls out of them, put them in the freezer, and freeze them solid, put them in a Ziploc bag. Then when I got ready,
That's another level.
and then I could just pull a ball out and put it, and then as it was defrosting, it also was cooling the worm bin too.
I will not be doing worms. I'm just saying.
So what do you do with your worms?
I use their castings is why. Does that answer? I raised them for their castings. Did that answer your question?
What's cat? No.
Okay, the purpose of raising them is to harvest their castings or to harvest their poop, and you use it as a fertilizer.
Oh, okay. So these worms you're talking about now, they can't be used for fishing.
They can, but then they're
That's
gone.
more like it, right?
I mean, you don't want to use your worms out of your bin because you go fishing 2 or 3 times a week and you use that worm, well then you're not going to have any worms before too long.
I don't think I'm going to do it either.
Well, like I said,
you know,
it's not for everybody. It is not for
I guess
everybody.
when we were growing up in the rural area before, when I was in high school, it was a lady to raise worms.
Yeah.
We'd go get them.
Well, she'd go fishing with them. Yeah,
She'd go
yeah.
fishing with them.
Yeah.
Some people eat worms too.
Oh my
don't
God.
Well, they're supposed in China. See, I didn't go there. In China, they freeze dry them and crush them up, and
They
they
cats
use them.
too, so they eat monkeys
Bunch of
too. Where
weirdos.
did they stop the virus from?
There you go.
Okay, so types of food that they can eat: fruits and peels. Vegetables and peels, eggshells, coffee grinds, cake, spaghetti, oatmeal, you kind of get the picture. The wetter it is, be careful, because you don't want to create an anaerobic environment. No citrus. No citrus, because that'll burn them. Also be very careful about salt and that sort of thing, because you don't want, that can burn them up. And so if you have a little, now, and I meant to say too, during the composting, cake, if you, no icing, but if you have a cake and it's a bundt cake of some sort and there's no icing on it, or you have a cake donuts left or whatever, I mean, they're good for the worm bin, but they're good for the birds. They need that high fat content. So if I have some banana bread left over and it's getting too old or whatever, I go out and put it in my bird feeder, as long as it doesn't have icing on it. Mm-hmm. Now here in the worm bin, it can have some icing, but not much. Don't be careful how much icing it has. But just some leftover cake or whatever is good for your birds.
Excuse me, you said fruits and peel, but you said no citrus.
No citrus.
There's no oranges.
Yeah, no orange peels or any oranges, lemons, grapefruit, anything like that. None of that. Because the acid content will just shrivel them up. Okay, types of food not to feed.
Okay.
Citrus, meat and dairy, fatty foods, and pet feces. Meat and dairy and fatty foods, there again you're calling in unwanted pests. is what you're doing when you feed. So this is one case that you probably want to stick to the rules there because you're growing them in this little containment. Now in ground, I don't know. You know, I keep saying that, and I'm just not there. I've got other things going, and I'm just not there to replenish my worm supply. Okay, so when you get ready to feed your worms, you divide your container into 9 different sections. So that's just telling you to don't feed in it doesn't have to be exactly 9, you know, but if you feed here in this corner, like if you feed here this week, feed here next week, feed here the next week, feed here the next week, and feed in the middle the next. Then start over. It doesn't have to be exactly 9. That's just kind of giving you to let you know, do not feed them in the same place every time. And the scraps will be gone by the time you have to repeat the locations. The scraps will be gone. This method helps prevent an anaerobic environment. Okay, critters in your bin. It just keeps getting better and better, doesn't it?
It just does. I was almost hungry now.
You've got bacteria, fungi, springtails. Those are my favorite, the springtails, and sow bugs. These are your workhorses in your worm bin. As long as your worm bin is balanced, these critters will not invade your home or garden. I've never had a critter come out. I've never had anything come out of my worm bin once my worms got settled a couple of days after I got them. So you are going to pull the paper back and you're going to see some bug activity. But that is a good thing, not a bad thing if you see some bugs in as long as it's not roaches and that kind of thing. I've never had a roach to get in my.
But you keep yours in the house all the time. Do you keep yours outside? Do you ever have bugs?
Yeah, I get some bugs. I mean, those type of bugs. I've not had a bug problem at all. Whenever I was in San Marcos, I used to keep a worm bin on my office desk. And if you didn't know what it was, you'd never know, because there was no smell, no odor, no nothing. And even in my office, I never had problems with bugs.
Yeah, except for the bugs that are supposed to be there.
In
You
New
have
York,
decorated
they do
office decorated, wasn't it? When the office
Yeah.
decorated, I hate to walk
They
into
have
my office with
coffee
a bug.
tables.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
You decorate the
because
container.
they're trying to compost and get stuff for their, say in New York, in certain apartments, they definitely have worm bins. She said that coffee table, didn't know that.
takes 3
But they have
times
worm
to
bins in
do
the
that.
apartment so they can fertilize their plants. Like if you live in a small apartment and you need something, it's like,
Okay, now harvesting the castings. This is where the labor of love comes in. Now, and I'll have Richard explain the way he does it. So we both do it 2 different ways. I'm going to do it Richard's way one day.
I'm the lazy way of
His is
doing it.
faster than how I do
No,
it.
mine actually takes longer. I'm the lazy way.
Well, okay, you're right. You're right. And I put this in capital dark letters before we begin. It can be therapeutic to sort worms. So just remember that. So what you're going to do, I do the dump and hand sort method. So what I do is I pick, now it takes a long time. It takes about a year to get to the point. And you'll know it's time to use your castings when you'll just know. It'll just get too high up. You can't keep enough bedding in there. And you can't keep it moist because the bottom is just filled up too much with casting. So what I do is I go in my greenhouse. I have a table and in there, and I lay newspaper out, and I go and get a bucket for the compost, and then I get a bucket to put the worms in. And I get a little bit, I just scoop up a little bit of the compost, put it in the bucket so the worms will have somewhere to kind of, well, they'll get so many in there they can't all hide, but they can kind of start out. And then I'll get a scoopful and put it here, and a scoopful and put it there, and then I just start moving worms over. They don't like sunlight, so they're going to start moving to that pile, the other pile. You thin that pile out and they're moving over there because they don't like sunlight. And so I go through that pile, dump it in the bucket that I have for the compost, scoop out another pile and put it there, go to the pile where all the worms are, start going through the compost and moving those worms. They're going to be moving over to the second pile that you put there as that pile gets thinner. It'll get to the point near the end that you're just going to have a conglomerate of worms, and you're not going to just be picking one or two out of there anymore. And you're going to be getting them by the handfuls and putting them in the bucket, in your worm bucket, and just do that back and forth until there isn't any compost left in there. Now, I always leave a little bit of a layer, but I fluff it kind of up so that it's not so compacted. And then I put the worms back in there, and then I put start the newspaper over again on top, and then you just start over. And so they don't have a whole, although they're happy, still there's not a whole lot of compost in there, so it kind of looks like you got more worms than compost, but it doesn't take long to, it'll start building back up again. And so that's how you, like I said, it's a true labor of love. I don't spend, it takes all day, but I don't spend 8 hours at a time. I walk off, come back, walk off, come back, and so I'll spend almost all day on it, but not just standing there all day. So there again, you need lots of light, a plastic dish pan. I use buckets, and a bucket for the casting. I use a bucket for the worms. You need fresh bedding to add to the bin, because you're not going to have enough, because that castings have raised up. You're not going to have enough bedding, the old bedding, to be enough when you put it back in there. So there again, that's what that just says the same thing that I did. I don't do the 9 piles. I do 2 piles and just move it back and forth. Okay, why do you even go through all this? You know, why do you even want to even do it? Well, you can use, now this is precious stuff. So the only thing that gets castings at my house is potted plants, or a plant that's not doing well. I do not use it in the garden. The only time I'll use it in the flower bed is if I think a plant needs an extra boost, or it's declining and I think, okay, and I'll scratch a little. But I mostly use it for my potted plants. African violets love this stuff. So you can side dress seed beds. I will also use it, now I use it in liquid, which we'll get to that. I use it in liquid form. But I will use it for my seedlings. When my seedlings first emerge, I like to give them a shot of something to kind of get them going. This is very organic. They do quite well with it. And so I will use it for my, when I'm in the wintertime, when I'm doing tomato, you know, for my garden or my flower seeds. Put a handful in the bottom of your transplants. It's good for that. Top dress plants. Make a tea to fertilize your plants, and that's what I do with it, is I make a tea with it. I do it 2 different ways. I make that, let's see, what's the next? Okay, this is one way that if I need a lot at a time, this is what I do. But you got to use it quick, although I haven't, and it has benefited my plants, but this is the ultimate of, you know, the ultimate way of using it. You get a 5-gallon bucket. You get 4 to 6 cups of worm castings, an old pillowcase, 1 ounce of molasses, and I use grandmother's molasses. I do use that for this. And a basic aquarium air pump. And I meant to bring it, and I didn't go out in the greenhouse and do it. It's just the aquarium pump that bubbles in the, I think I got it for $10 at Walmart. So you'll fill the pillowcase up with worm castings. You'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with water, add the molasses, and then put the aquarium pump in the bucket and plug it in and let it bubble for 24 hours. I think it's the same.
Or you
Yes.
can use a Minna aerator.
Yeah, same thing.
You just want to add oxygen to it. When you come back the next morning, it's like you're going to love it. You're going to love it.
I'm not going to do it.
Joe Fran, it's like a vermicultural latte. It has
I don't even drink coffee, so gross. Y'all
it's
are
got
kidding.
a nice foam on top.
No way.
Now you're going to want to use for the best. Now your microbes are in full force right now. So for the best results, you're going to want to use that 5-gallon bucket right away. I haven't before, and I've never noticed that huge of a difference. It's still good. It's still going to fertilize your plants, but if you want it in its ultimate glory, that is how to do it. I just find it easier to use the tea than the granular. Another way that I do it is I get a leg pantyhose, the leg, and I stuff that full of castings, tie a knot in the top of it, stuff it in a gallon. I think I went and cranberry juice, one of those gallons that have the handle juice gallons, I fill that up with warm water and shake it up real good, and I'll walk around and I'll use that until there just isn't any you want the tea the color of iced tea, that dark. Once it lightens up enough to where I can tell, then I'll pull that thing out, add more castings, and I use it that way. So, and it works great, but that also defies the 24-hour thing, you know, of when the microbes are at their best. I fertilize my orchids that way, my African violets, and I get good results that way also. I don't always have time to do this, so anyway, I do keep, when I harvest, how do you, I have a 5-gallon bucket, and I get a bag, a garbage bag, and I put my castings in that and wrap so it'll stay moist, and wrap it up and knot it and set it in that leave it in that 5-gallon bucket. How do you
something very similar to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then, okay, now tell them how you harvest yours. I'm sorry, Richard, I went on to
That's okay. I had to step out to FedEx to pick up FedEx package. At the bottom of my bins, I've got holes in the bottom of the bins, and those holes are there for ventilation. Those holes are there so moisture can leach out. Also, whenever it gets time for me to harvest, what I'll do is I'll prepare another bin with shredded moist newspaper, and I'll put that on top, and then I'll start feeding them in that new bin. And the worms in that bottom bin, like, where's my food? Oh, it's so we're going to go through the holes in the bottom, and they will migrate to that top bin. And over about 3 months or so, they'll migrate to that top bin, start doing their thing in the top bin, and then I've got my castings in the bottom bin, and then so I'll harvest it that way. Longer than the 8 hours that Charlene does. It's a lazy way of doing it. So I don't have that therapeutic sorting through like what she does. Now, yeah, when I get ready to harvest, yeah, there's still some bins after 3 months or so in that, there's still some worms in that bottom bin, but most of them have migrated north.
So you do, it takes how long?
For them
Oh,
to
3 or
get
4
to
months or so.
3 or 4 months?
Yeah, I give them
Still.
plenty of time. Because I know there's probably some worms in there like my son. They're a little slow at times and they're not going to move so fast. So I give them plenty of time to find their food.
And that's a less hands-on, you know. Okay, worm castings can be slightly acidic
Problematic.
and high in salt. So it should always be mixed with other potting materials. I don't necessarily do that and have never had a problem. Use it selectively and sparingly because it takes a long time to get it. Vermicompost will not burn your plants. It's 1.80 nitrogen, 1.32 phosphorus, and 1.28 potassium. Compare that to triple 13. So it's a slow. But I did an experiment when I first got my first harvest, and I had a rubber plant, and I had a mother rubber plant, and I had clipped off a clipping for somebody that wanted a clipping of it and put it in another pot. Well, I forgot who it was, and I guess the person forgot that they wanted it. And the mother plant, man, was taking a little bit of a nosedive. I don't know what the deal was, and the cutting was doing pretty good. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use Miracle Grow on one and vermicompost on the other. And I don't remember which one I did, but during the course of the summer, the one that I had put vermicomposting on, the leaves were darker. The stem was incredible. I could not believe compared to the one that I did the synthetic fertilizer with. So it's slow and easy. You know, like I said in the beginning when we talking about compost, it's not quick because it's just one, but slow and steady, you get a better product in the end. I could not believe the difference when I did it. It was just incredible. Okay, one thing about having worms as pets, you can go away without having to make arrangements for pet care. The lady that wrote, now this book, if you're wanting to get into it, this is a good book for reference, The Worms Eat My Garbage. It's by Mary Applehoff. She gets very technical in here if you want to do it technical. There again, like I said, I keep it simple and just estimate a lot of things, but she gets really down to the math on this. It's an excellent book and a good reference. There's also several newsletters. I was getting them for a while, and then I went through one day and started weeding out some of my newsletters, and that was one of them that I weeded out. But I think wormcomposting.com, I think, is the name. You shouldn't have any trouble finding any information out there on worms. But anyway, I thought this was such a cool sentence that Mary had in her book was, tender loving care for worms basically means respecting them as living organisms. So, that's it. That's all I got.